Good morning. Welcome to day 15, halfway through our first month together in this very exciting time. So we're reviewing our process of evolution, moving into the third stage of our existence as a species, moving from Homo erectus, which is the root of our tribal mind, several million years in development and pretty much done with its existence. The much more recent evolution of Homo sapiens over the past few thousand years, the egoic mind, the intelligence, the brilliance that created our communication network, being that that's what we are, our highest level of evolution as a species now, Homo glimiulus or Homo spiritus, is the recognition of our full nature as conduits for the energetic principle of the universe, this being seated in our energy body, a communication device. That this is what our species was designed to be, first developing the body, then developing the mind, then developing our communication capability. Okay, so if you just really focus on that as the more or less sole purpose of our species, we truly weren't successful as a species in much else. We weren't terribly successful with the development of our civilization hasn't seemingly improved that much over 5,000 years in our ability to grow food or get along, a process of education and what have you. But there have been markers, so, I look at the philosophy that I use as the foundation of our existence, which is, this Taoist perspective, which is more or less 5,000 years old. That in these past 5,000 years, looking for evidence of, what have we as a species, evolution basically demands, innovation or extinction. And so, the tribal mind really was not able to be innovative much at all. Basic work with development of tools and such, but you can see, and I live in a culture here in Ecuador where I'm surrounded by these tribal people, and they're still doing things exactly the same as their ancestors would have been doing things 5,000 years ago, raising animals, growing food, all just using basic hand tools. Nobody uses any type of power tool per se. It's like it's not interesting to them. You could actually make that available to them, then they'll go back to the hammer. Or, it's kind of cute to watch one of the things that the women love to do at gatherings is they sit together on the ground and crack walnuts with two stones. And it's delightful. So you just imagine that their ancestors 5,000 years ago sitting on the ground cracking walnuts open with two stones. Very, very delightful. Again, what we're looking to do here is see this full integration, because evolution isn't intended to be linear. Who says it's linear? There's, this is just a product of our egoic mind that would say that in 2021, there should be an obvious linear progression in our evolutionary progress as a species. Not so. If you look more from a Asian perspective, Taoist or Buddhist, Zen or whatever, that idea of a linear progression doesn't make any sense. If you look at nature, there's not a linear progression in anything in nature. Things go more in circles, in these cycles. Okay, so there are these patterns that keep repeating themselves over and over again, and there's something incredibly delightful about that. So an essential ingredient for us in fully appreciating our current evolution requires an awakening beyond the limits of the rational mind. Again, the rational mind has this limit in Hawkins' scale of 400, a relatively low level of energetic power or vibrational quality. So to see beyond the limits, because we're witnessing now the sort of the full flowering of the egoic mind with all of its addiction to combat, conflict. That's what the egoic mind is all about. It's all about right versus wrong, good versus bad, up versus down, black versus white, male versus female, whatever the polarity. Remember, we're looking at this from a Taoist perspective. We have the whole, the circle, with the division of black and white. But it's the duality that is appreciated, accepted and appreciated within the whole, the dance of duality, which can be a delightful thing, right? I mean, just made me think about the way in which we've developed and the things, that's relatively recent in our history, only a few hundred years, that romantic love evolved. Okay, it didn't exist 500 years ago or 5,000 years ago. But it became a very powerful movement in our evolutionary cycle, this beautiful dance, right? Male and female, romantic love, sexuality, all of that became very dominant, maybe especially in the 19th and 20th centuries. But we see that now coming to a close, that the limitations of that dance of duality between the male and the female, again, was meant to be a representation of something greater. And now we're moving into something greater. So this great awakening or great reset is pointing toward something beyond the limitations of the tribal and egoic consciousness. Okay, so again, for most, it's difficult to see it. Maybe you could imagine it, but to actually see it clearly is what the current call for us to do as masters is, to see it clearly and bring it into manifestation. Okay, say one small example that I think would be relatively easy to grasp is the idea of community superseding family. Okay, the tribal mind is all about the biological clan. It truly is the focus of their existence, is that notion of the biological clan. Survival depended upon that. Okay, in our egoic development, that tribal sense of family being all important fell away. The individual the development of the individual, became more important than the family unit. A very lonely journey that many of us know very well. But you could see the limits of that lonely struggle, okay? Because the egoic journey, again, is defined by struggle. Remember, conflict. It's so imagining a world with a species that is not driven by these old forms, okay? So what would replace family? What would replace the solo journey? Community. Okay, so it's very easy for me to see, and part of what I'm manifesting here is this idea of intentional community where like-minded individuals come together to become a new form of family. Okay, that this is how people would choose to live in the future. Because imagine, for example, that in the not too distant future, humans will not be producing children any longer the way we have in the past, where a male and a female would come together and sexually produce a child and have the responsibility as a family to raise that child, and all of that, which we would assume, well, that's just the way things have always been and the way things will always be. Well, not true. Not true. The technology that's available, in fact, one of the key ingredients of the mRNA vaccine is a genetic switch that will sterilize all women. That's built into the plan, that in the future, humans will not be allowed to produce children. Children will be developed, as you would expect, with the technology that's available using the apparatus that's fully in place to take human tissue and clone it, produce bodies, perfect bodies without any possibility of disease or infirmities or whatever. I mean, that's where we're heading as far as the ability to produce bodies. But that's not really so much the point. I mean, what is that really ultimately like the issue? It's only an issue if you are coming from some kind of religious or psychological notion that this is what was intended. You know, this is what, you know, God would intend. Well, that's not true. Evolution is simply always bent on perfecting its product. Okay, so again, anyway, the idea would be whether or not you still imagine a male and a female procreating to produce a child, or the child being similarly produced in a laboratory. It's like, how are these children, the new beings, raised? How are they cared for? In my clear vision, it's all done in community. It's that the community is much better equipped, especially a multi-generational community, to raise children in a beautiful way, way beyond the limits of the nuclear family. I mean, if you think back, it just, the limitations of that are staggering. Okay, and in more enlightened societies in the past, that never could have happened. There would be no such thing as that. In ancient times, children would be raised by the community. The people that are most adept at raising the children, educating them and loving them and all that, these are not the biological parents. Certainly could include a parent, mother or father, but it wouldn't be limited to that. Okay, so we're seeing that whole thing breaking down before our eyes. You know, the family unit during this time of cocooning, everyone being forced together, and suicide rates, domestic violence. I mean, everything just going off the charts. because that's not the best way. That's not the best way for people to be together.